there's no substitute for prayer and God showing up right on time. So, I don't think it doesn't matter what level, what context of ministry we're in. You face situations that are bigger than you.
Right.
And when you say, God, I need your help, he provides a way. And that's what you were describing. God's good. Yeah.
Marcus Aurelius said, "What we do in life echoes through eternity." What is your life echoing through eternity? Welcome to Echoes Through Eternity with Dr. Jeffrey Skinner. Our mission is to inspire, engage, and encourage leaders from across the globe to plant missional churches and be servant leaders. So join us and hear the stories of servant leaders reverberating lives as God echoes them through eternity. Brought to you by Missional Church Planting and Leadership Development and Dynamic Church Planting International.
Welcome into Echoes Through Eternity. I am your host, Dr. Jeffrey D. Skinner. I am joined in the studio today by Reverend Kyle Poole. He is the District Superintendent in the Church of Nazarene for the state of Georgia. And I'll let him kind of unpack what that is and what those responsibilities are. But he has served at various capacities within the church, and I think carries a unique perspective based upon those roles that he has served. He served as a youth pastor and a lead pastor, and now kind of middle management in Church of Nazarene. I like to tell people, Kyle, that we have the worst of both worlds or the best of both worlds. I'm not sure how you consider it when you talk about our polity and organization here, but a district superintendent being middle management, you have just enough power to make you feel important, but not enough power to really do anything, right?
Right.
But anyway, yeah, tell us a little bit about you and then where you come from. Obviously, your family and is important to you as well. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, first, just let me say thanks for inviting me. I sure appreciate you, Jeff and Lisa, and have known you since Trevecca days.
That's right.
So we share that path in common, and it's been good to interact with you here in Georgia and appreciate the work you're doing in church planting.
Yeah. I tell people, let me interrupt just a second here.
Sure.
While I was sleeping in my religion classes, Kyle was actually taking notes and paying attention. And so I became a church planter and he became a district superintendent. So that we know how.
Yeah. Something like that. Right.
Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. So married to Julie, been married for 32 years. We met at Trevecca. And I never thought I'd be a pastor, actually, till I was at Trevecca. Was called to ministry there, was a business major, went on to seminary, started out in youth ministry. God's allowed us to have two boys, Jackson and Curtis, who are both graduates of Trevecca now. Curtis, the youngest, married this summer, and he's a worship leader at Charlotte, Pineville Church of the Nazarene.
Nice.
Jackson is an auditor, internal auditor at HCA there in Nashville. And so we're just feel very thankful that God has blessed our boys and us. And I'm a pastor at heart, Jeff. Truly, when I received that call at Trevecca, I didn't want to do anything else. I wanted to be a pastor, and I feel like I still am, just in a very different role. So, pastored 4 churches after I left seminary. Well, first was in youth ministry and loved it. I worked at headquarters as an editor and in youth ministry. And in 1997, went to Grand Saline, Texas, one stoplight town in East Texas. And I learned a lot there about ministry and pastoring. Didn't know anybody in the town till we got there and have great friends there to this day. So we love the journey of pastoring. Grand Saline, and then Gardendale, Alabama, and then Gallatin, Tennessee, and then Midland Valley, South Carolina. So it was in 2018 that the Georgia district elected us, and we prayed long and hard because Midland Valley was a sweet spot and still in many ways feels like home with the relationships we have there. But we've been at this 4.5 years. So we moved to just south of Atlanta, and God's been good to us. So we're still learning on the job here at the DS. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember a conversation I had with my district superintendent in Alabama, and I watched that transition from pastoral role to district superintendent role. And we were talking one day, and he said, and I was astounded when he told me this. And he said, they don't have any training when you become a DS. I mean, they just kind of throw you in there and say, do your job. They have some seminars they take you through, but there's no, course that says how to be a DS. And, in 90 days or less. So
Yeah.
I was
They
like,
had,
wow.
they have come a long way
Okay.
lately. There's a pretty solid orientation,
Good.
and then they match you up with a mentor now. So I think they've improved that process, but
That's
still,
good.
there is no way to prepare for everything you face. Just like pastoral ministry, until you do it, you learn on the job a lot too.
Right. Yeah. There's no seminar for what to do when a church burns down or
Right.
a
Right.
pastor has a moral failure or
Yeah.
is personally attacked or shot. Crazy things like that you have to deal with sometimes. That I remember in Alabama, a board meeting went awry and you had people showing up with guns at a board meeting, and our DS there having
Sad.
to deal with that. And and I know that it's easy to look at the church and throw stones and say, oh, I can't believe this. These people are supposed to be better than that. And we are called to be better than that. And we don't necessarily want to use brokenness as an excuse, but the reality is we are all broken. And that the same problems that we have, the divorce rate outside the church is the same as inside the church. And that shouldn't surprise us because we're made up of our world, right? And so we're all a work in progress. And so I used to I guess be one to throw stones and cast aspersions, think, why are we not better? But I just continually use that as a reminder that we got to remain close to the Lord in everything that we do, even as pastors,
Absolutely.
even as church people. If we don't,
Absolutely.
it's easy to get caught up in that chaos that's outside there. And Jesus' model for us was not to, yes, we can enter into the chaos, but we can do it safely because Jesus redeemed the chaos and redeemed
Absolutely.
the brokenness there.
Yeah.
So great. Appreciate that. So some of the things, like, talk to us a little bit about, you've been in pastoral ministry for 32 years, I guess, since you and Julie. I know her name as well as I know my own wife's name, but for some reason it left me. But anyway, you and Julie have been married. So talk to me a little bit about the challenges that you faced and what you've seen happen over the years. But as a youth pastor, what you did, what your role was, how you grew in that. And then, challenge for the pastoral, as a lead pastor in a church. And then finally, as DS, they're kind of different changing perspectives.
Yeah, man, that sounds like a lifetime of things to sum up. But I'll try to start with the call. The call of God on our life is so critical. Whatever, that call is for someone. I know that sometimes it's hard to discern the specifics, when you talk about location but what I'm talking about is that full surrender when you say, hey, Lord, I'm yours. And when you feel that call to ministry, I think wherever you are, whether you're a youth pastor, a DS, those things really are subordinate. They are secondary to the call to say, God, here I am. And I still feel that way. When I said yes as a sophomore at Trevecca, I said, Lord, wherever you call me in pastoral ministry, I'll go. That's been the case. So I think it comes down to the call and then relationships with not only God, of course, but people. Whatever the changing context or culture, and we've changed a lot over the last few decades, no doubt. But one thing that doesn't change is the relationships with people. And that authentic, hey, this is who I am. I'm so thankful that people have allowed me to be who God created me to be and not forced me to be in a mold of somebody else. When God called me, I said, I don't have a preacher voice. I heard all these guys with these booming preacher voices growing up that I respect so much. And I said, God, you didn't give me that, and the Lord just reminded me, called you to be Kyle and to be faithful to me. So whether we've been in youth ministry or pastoring or DS, I'm so thankful that the churches we've served and the district we now serve have allowed us to do that, to not try to fit the mold of somebody else, but to walk in that calling. So the calling and relationships, I think, are the two things I would emphasize, that no matter what's changing around us, the call of God and the relationships with people remain steadfast.
What were some of the challenges you faced as a youth pastor back 30 years ago compared to you faced as a senior pastor once you stepped into that role? Your perspective, how did it shift?
Yeah, man, that's a great question. Well, I think one thing you realize is in youth, the challenges of ministry are very similar in the sense that you're dealing with broken people and need God's help. Whether it's in youth ministry, pastoral ministry, or DS, you're dealing with a broken world, broken people who need the grace of God difference in leadership is I guess when it comes to youth ministry, you're dealing with the students and the families.
Mm-hmm.
When you move into that lead pastor role, you're not only dealing with people and their families, but you're dealing with the accountability of the whole church. And so I think you begin to realize that the decisions you make, the statements you make represent not only yourself in that one situation, but as you move into different roles, they represent a larger group of people. So,
Right.
so as pastor, the things you say and the ways you respond represent the whole church. And then as a DS now, that's even magnified in the sense that, hey, I'm just Kyle and I have opinions, but I have to recognize that when I say something, it's not just my own opinion necessarily, but people say, oh, that's the Georgia district. And so all of a sudden you realize this responsibility is much larger than yourself.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the difference, is just realizing that you not only represent the Lord in that situation, but you represent an organization that's much larger than you.
Yeah, that is good. I had not, you're right though. Your voice at each level, your voice is amplified in a way that carries more weight, even if, and that's tough because sometimes, as you said, you're just Kyle. And
Right.
so you're just sharing Kyle's opinion. But because of your position and what you say, those words carry more weight. And even if you don't intend them to, you may see, Carl on the side of the road somewhere and say, well, why all these cars catching on fire on the side of the road in Atlanta, Georgia? Well, the DS in Georgia says that cars in Georgia explode spontaneously.
Yeah.
So,
you got it.
Silly example there, but that is important to hear. And I think is important why I think even our political leaders sometimes forget that, they're saying things and it ends up getting amplified. And they're like, I didn't mean it in that way. And so I think that's a good reminder for all of us to measure our words.
It's just being aware, right? Trying to be self-aware and organizationally aware. We make mistakes. We never do it perfectly, but to say, Lord, help me to be wise. I think that's a prayer for all of us to pray. Help me to be wise.
Yeah, that's good. So what would you say your biggest struggle as a district superintendent in the church in general, just some patterns that you're seeing? What would you say you see as one of the biggest struggles facing the church today?
Wow, man, there's so many. I mean, we could start really broad and just say this whole move into postmodernism, post-Christendom, which people say, what in the world is that? Of course, this is a very broad thing, but whereas the church used to be the dominant voice in culture, I think everybody who's a part of the church in any level, whether they can articulate it or not, is still wrestling with why is it that our voice and our sway isn't what it used to be. And so there are many different ways for that to be packaged. But I think bottom line is that the move into postmodernism, post-Christendom, which is that there are more and more people who their beliefs and their church attendance, are not a given in America, right? In our context. Right. And so what we've seen in other parts of the world, Europe especially for years, is reality here. There are many unchurched people, many churches who don't proclaim to Christian faith. So I think the challenge is, how does the church fit into that? So that's a broad challenge, to recognize the church and even the district superintendent, doesn't have the authority, quote unquote, as you said, that they used to have. Kind of get over that and realize that your influence is going to come through discipleship, followership of Jesus, and relationship, and not structure, and just because your name is the church or DS. So it's a big overall change. There's a lot of other ones, and I'll just touch on one. Man, we're all moving post-COVID. So if you talk about challenges we face, our churches have done really well being resilient. I think the Church of the Nazarene, and it's kind of generally smaller church size and discipleship model focus on it, is really built for this in some ways. But at the same time, man, the church looks different coming out of COVID. I think you've probably covered that many times in your leadership podcast. But just remembering that, hey, it's different. There's about a third of people who didn't come back physically. There's a bunch of new people there that weren't there before. But it's just a whole hybrid model that didn't used to exist between physically and online. So I think we're all navigating that together. So those are some of the big, what I call macro challenges. You
can be a co-creator with God by helping to echo our guest voices Share our episodes with friends and family and on your own social media accounts. Give us positive 5-star reviews. The more positive reviews we have, the more visibility we have, and the more voices that are echoed through eternity. We often invite guests who are serving faithfully year after year, often in anonymity in their respective roles and ministries. God sees them, and the reality is for a good kingdom leader, that's enough. We do not do what we do for the accolades of humanity. We do it because we're called by God. But I believe that God uses people like you and I to continue those reverberations and echo them throughout eternity. You can partner with God by liking, subscribing, writing a quick positive 5-star review, and again, sharing those voices with friends and family and on your own social media accounts. Those reviews will eventually lead to other guests who have larger platforms that have more listeners who will then in turn listen to the show. And again, it further echoes those voices, which is the whole vision of the Echoes Through Eternity podcast here, is to continue echoing those voices that God is echoing through eternity there. So like and subscribe and review us if you would. We'd appreciate that greatly. So where would you say you see God moving in unique ways today?
Oh, man. I really think that what we've always been called to do is get out of the walls of the church and into our communities is being magnified right now. I think that because of the things I've just described, the postmodern shift and post-COVID, it's more important than ever that churches realize that church is not a building. It never was. The ecclesia is the gathering of people, and we're on mission. I think it was a quote you and I probably learned way back at Tribeca. Emil Brunner says that the church exists for mission as a fire exists for burning, that we are not even the church unless we're on mission. And so I think the churches that are thriving are those churches that are realizing we got to get out, we got to connect with people outside the walls, and so that's exciting. We've got some churches embracing communities on mission, which is a partnership that the district has with the Zimmerman brothers. Mm-hmm. And that's just a way to train churches how to go out in small groups and adopt a mission in a community to be missional. That's where we see the church thriving. Some have always done that, but we've got to do a better job of saying, man, we just got to get out and be the church.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that. I was interviewed a guy yesterday, and his interview will post next week. He works with the North American Mission Board for the Southern Baptist denomination. He was saying, and his specialty is what he called church replanting, not so much revitalization. And although he's worked within revitalization, but he said, I asked him what replanting was, or if he had any metrics, and he said essentially that replanting is helping the church to recognize or reclaim those practices they had when they were first planting the church. And that's really what those guys do. I remember, I think he's coming again this year to speak to the district.
Yeah, January 14th.
Yeah,
January 14th.
I saw that the other day. And but that's what he talks about, is basically getting out there in these missional communities, so to speak, are basically what we had to do as church planters, is just get out there and build these relationships. And even we talked about being careful with our words at the various levels of ministry there. But if the reality is, if we as Christians, individual Christians, if we would measure our words and remember that what we say as a Christian is amplifying the voice of God for the people out there, because our words are carrying weight, I think that we would fare much, much better as the ecclesial people going out, and we wouldn't have lost that voice. I think we postmodernity is more reaction to a church leading poorly, or than it is necessarily culture shifting. I don't know anyone when faced with life or death that doesn't choose life, and that's really what we're all. It's not sin and shame versus legalism that we're offering. We're offering life or death. And we've not done a good job of communicating that over the years. So I like how you talk about that as an opportunity there. And I do find opportunity. One of the positives I've seen coming out post-COVID is that it's forcing us to be more intentional about every area of leadership in the church, and even in multiplying the leaders, because we don't take that for granted anymore. And that's something else we haven't done well, is we've tended to keep that leadership circle tight instead of empowering others and training those others. And so what we've had was, when that baton went to be passed to that next generation, there was nobody there to take the baton. And so it dropped. So good. I like that. So Kyle, you were working on your doctorate. Now you got one more year and you'll be done with that?
I'm halfway through. It's a 3-year program through Nazarene Seminary, and a deep in. It's in ecclesial mission and leadership, which is basically a fancy way of saying, the superintendency role of oversight. How do we be real intentional about developing ourselves and our leaders underneath us? Yeah. So I'm a year and a half in. My research is on Sabbath, and particularly for pastors. But I'm learning a lot myself just about my own need for rest and renewal. So there's a leadership class each semester, and then there's your research. And so I'm halfway through a 3-year program.
Cool. So tell us a little bit what you're learning so far about Sabbath and need for rest and the importance of that pattern in our life.
Well, yeah, I've learned that we're all tired and we need rest, right? We need a nap. Yeah. Well, let me just kind of walk you through the 3 semesters so far in a nutshell. The first semester I just wrote on the biblical theological understanding of Sabbath. So it's a pattern, in creation that God established. And when we abuse it or neglect it, we suffer. And I think we've seen that not only community-wise or society-wise as people don't rest, but we see it individually. And then the second semester was more about what does Sabbath look like in a digital age. So in this age of constant connectivity, where we got devices and notifications pinging all the time, how do we find ways to pause and stop that and rest and reflect? And so Sabbath in a digital age, what does that look like? And then this last semester was more on clergy well-being and pastors in particular, kind of leaning into the needs of pastors and why rest is so important. So that's where I am now. It's going to be moving into what I hope will become a small groups of pastors gathering, pastors in community, talking, evaluating, how am I doing with rest? How am I doing with mental health and rest and reflection? And then how can we implement Sabbath practices and rhythms together so that can multiply through our leaders? So I'm hoping to come out with a tool that pastors can use in small groups in different contexts. That's my hope.
Yeah, good. So is there mentorship involved in that now as far as working with the other pastors? Is that part of your dissertation? Or
Well, there's going to need to be, as it moves into this last phase, when we talk about community, it's really going to be more of a cohort model, yeah. I think, that is mentorship, not so much learning from each other and hoping that there can be in a small group setting enough openness and trust for people to be real. Pastors face really unique pressures that other people don't always understand, and so being able to have colleagues that understand your situation and can reflect and you can get feedback. That's the hope, is that it would also combat the isolation pastors feel, but hopefully they could work on the rest component as well. That's the hope.
Yeah, I like that cohort model. It's one of the things I use when I'm coaching other church planters. We have a cohort there and I encourage them, the other planters. I said, look, you have perspectives that other planters don't have. So share that. Right. Don't be ashamed. Nobody's suggesting that what works out in the middle of Auburn, Alabama is necessarily going to work in South Georgia or Southern California. But there may be something there that you learned, a lesson you picked up along the way that could be used there. And I like that, using each other's voices to learn from. And it's not as threatening either. I think one-on-one, sometimes that becomes intimidating for leaders, different levels there, especially if there's a power differential there. Even among pastors, there tends to be a power differential. If there's a pastor in your church of 500 and you're a church planter struggling with 25 or 30, there sometimes I think within our own brain, even though it may not necessarily be true, we're thinking, well, that person's better than us, and he probably doesn't want to talk to me, or probably doesn't have anything to teach me, so or wouldn't want me to bother him or her. And I think that's another thing is we have underestimated the voice of the women within the church, Big C church,
Absolutely.
over the years. And I am happy to say that I raised, there was 2 different women that I raised up when I was planting churches in Auburn. They were really good. They were sharp ladies.
That's great.
And I know within the church in Nazarene, we've got some sharp ladies out there as well. I won't start naming names because I'll leave somebody out.
I understand.
As I will, but there's a lot of good leaders out there.
Yeah,
well,
absolutely.
Kyle, I look forward to seeing your research on the Sabbath there. I know that I appreciate your leadership with the Georgia district here. You have led well. I've watched you start from the very beginning. We moved here about the time you became the DS. And so I've had the privilege of watching that and watching you develop as a leader. I remember you had a tough situation in the church you had to deal with as soon as you walked in the door. I thought you handled that well. That pastor ended up getting another church somewhere on Georgia, and he's doing well. And the new pastor at the church is doing well. So that was good.
There's no substitute for prayer and God showing up right on time. So, I don't think it doesn't matter what level, what context of ministry we're in. You face situations that are bigger than you.
Right.
And when you say, God, I need your help, he provides a way. And that's what you were describing. God's good. Yeah.
I appreciate that. All right, brother. Well, I appreciate it. All right. And your episode, I'll put a link to the Georgia website in there, and they can come follow you as well. Have you got any books you've written or anything out there yet?
No, man. No books. No.
All right. Well, if you ever write a book, let me know. We'll get that retro fitted to the podcast.
Okay.
All right.
Awesome.
Thanks, brother.
Yeah. You get what you needed?
Pardon?
You got everything you need?
Oh, got everything you need. Yep. You can be a co-creator with God by helping to echo our guest voices. Share our episodes with friends and family and on your own social media accounts. Give us positive 5-star reviews. The more positive reviews we have, the more visibility we have, and the more voices that are echoed through eternity. We often invite guests who are serving faithfully year after year, often in anonymity in their respective roles in ministries. God sees them, and the reality is for a good kingdom leader, that's enough. We do not do what we do for the accolades of humanity. We do it because we're called by God. But I believe that God uses people like you and I to continue those reverberations and echo them throughout eternity. You can partner with God by liking, subscribing, and writing a quick positive 5-star review, and again, sharing those voices with friends and family and on your own social media accounts. Those reviews will eventually lead to other guests who have larger platforms that have more listeners who will then in turn listen to the show. And again, it further echoes those voices, which is the whole vision of the Echoes Through Eternity podcast here, is to continue echoing those voices that God is echoing through eternity there. So like and subscribe and review us if you would. We'd appreciate that greatly.